Carolina?
Welcome to Lead-Based, yes?
Matt just informed me that a question came up, and I'd like to address it on asbestos, if that's okay.
Of course it is. Go right ahead.
Okay. Somebody asked me if this seminar, this webinar, can be applied towards credit towards the asbestos awareness at their school. And I asked that question the other day of my supervisor, and they said no. And the reason being because it's a 2-hour course, and this is very similar. And if they wanted to, I can send them this a PowerPoint that will help get them started for a 2-hour training course.
All right, thank you. We need to give just a little silence here because we're recording the next program. And so if we can just do 30 seconds of silence, we'll allow our recorder to start again with the new program. And thank you. Thank you, Chris. Welcome to Lead-Based Paint, Renovation, Repair, and Painting Rule, the second in a series of webinars for the Clean, Green, and Healthy Tribal Schools Initiative that are scheduled each Wednesday through February 22nd at this same time. Several of the programs are double features, such as the 2 programs that you're enjoying today. You're joining 86 other guests from communities, tribes, federal and state government agencies, schools, universities, and Head Start programs. Thank you for your interest in the health of our schools and communities. I'd like to introduce your speaker, Chris Maksimuk. Chris has been a lead-based paint and asbestos compliance inspector for the EPA for 4 years and has performed hundreds of lead-based paint and asbestos inspections in Region 8. Chris is a retired police officer from the LAPD, and with his background in building sciences, he's provided lead-based paint and compliance assistance to tribes throughout Region 8, and as a residential and commercial inspector, he's provided forensic evaluations of building component failures. So before Chris gives you the answers, will you respond again to 2 questions about lead-based paint by selecting and clicking on the answer? So here we are. Lead in paint dust is the most common way people are exposed, but there are no negative health benefits, or health effects, So if you'll vote. So about 50% have voted. Now we'll give it a few more seconds. 70% have voted. All right. About 75% have voted. We'll close the poll, share the results with you. We've got a little bit of a split here, Chris. 10% say yes, and low levels do not affect health. So we'll hide those results. And remember, Chris, we'll see that same question or a similar one later. Here's poll question number 2. RRP regulations must be followed in elementary and preschools built before 1978 if... We're getting lots of vote for all of the above. So more than 50% have voted. It's beginning to slow down. All right, so we'll close the poll and share the results. Chris, we've got some split numbers here, so it's a good thing that you're providing this webinar. Thank you. I'm going to hide the results for that. All right, thank you, Chris. And Chris will give you information now about lead dust and the RRP rule, as well as other information that will inform you about issues and opportunities for making our schools and communities safer. Chris?
Thank you, Carolina. I'm very happy to be here and do this outreach to help people understand the problems with lead and lead-based paint. And why are we concerned about it? Well, lead is dangerous to children, and there are no safe exposure or minimum exposure. We want children not to have any lead in their system at all. The children that are most especially susceptible to lead poisoning are children under 6. As you can see in this picture here, this little toddler, they crawl on the ground, they put their fingers in their mouth, and they put it back on the floor, and this is a scenario that goes on and on and on. And what happens is the children ingest it. Lead dust is the biggest culprit and reason for children getting lead poisoned. Their bodies are growing, and their bodies absorb more of it. So toddlers, and one other thing I want to say, pregnant women are also very vulnerable to lead-based paint poisoning. The developing fetus can negatively be affected, and I'll talk about what happens when children and fetuses are lead poisoned. So why is it dangerous? Let me go back here. Okay. It really affects negatively the child's developing their central nervous system. It can reduce a child's IQ and cause learning disabilities. It can cause behavioral problems as the child develops into adulthood. This little article here on the right, it talks about 310,000 children in the ages 1 to 5 have elevated blood lead levels in the United States. One of the things I want to point out is that these children will never get rid of the lead in their system. Lead is a heavy metal, it's toxic, and it actually settles to the bones, actually into the legs. It's a heavy metal, and gravity will force that lead into their marrow of their bones, and there it will stay. Only in severe cases can doctors, through a process, reduce the lead blood levels. But for the most part, it's something that cannot be reversed. One of the things that they have linked lead-based paint poisoning in children is behavioral problems. It's also caused hearing problems, damage to kidney damage, slow growth, abdominal pain, aggressive behavior. There are studies that show that crime, children, young adults committing crime, it's actually frightening. The blood levels in some children is going to be higher because their aggressive behavior is going to cause antisocial behavior and get in trouble with law enforcement. I never knew that when I was a police officer. In the inner cities where apartments are older and conditions are not kept well, children have a higher chance of getting lead poisoned. One of the things that the EPA has done is they initiated a law that's now in effect, and it's called the RRP, Renovation, Repair, and Paint Law. And let me go to this slide first before we talk about the RRP. Well, let me tell you that the lead that falls, that's in the paint, that falls off the house, and it goes into the yard, breaks down, and now you have lead in the soil. So you have children that are inside the house that have potential to be exposed, and the outside. And the biggest culprit of causing lead-based paint to be either inhaled or ingested is renovations. So now we have the regulation, federal regulation, called Renovation, Repair, and Paint. It's a new rule that came out in April of 2010. And let me go back one other one here. The slides are not keeping up with me here. But what this does, it's a regulation for housing or child-occupied facilities where renovation is going to be performed. And if it's older than 1978, so 1977 and older, certain regulations come into effect. One of the ones that comes into effect is that it requires contractors to get training before they disturb, and it requires testing before it's disturbed. So a child-occupied facility is a facility such as a preschool, nursery school, or kindergarten, wherever there are children under the age of 6 that regularly visit. And it requires, there's a formula to figure out how many hours a week, but for the most part, if your child's being dropped off most during the week, they are within the regulation, not the children, but the regulations in effect for any kind of a preschool built before 1978. So, who do we regulate? We regulate contractors hired by schools and worker maintenance. One of the things that worker maintenance, it requires is an 8-hour class, so they are able to understand what they disturb if it falls under the RRP rule. Now, in schools, maintenance persons that disturb painted surfaces, this is before buildings built in 1978, they must work for a certified firm or employer. Now, if it was a school, the school district would probably be the firm. And then, of course, the workers, at least one worker from the school district will have to go in training, take a 1-day class, and they'll learn all about keeping the dust down, disturbing it and containing it, and keeping the records and working in a lead-safe manner. Schools built for 1978 with no children. These are, let me back up. What activities and buildings are excluded from the rule? Children that attend school that are built in 1978 or newer. Homes built 1978 or newer. Housing for elderly, unless, again, children visit this regularly. 0-bedroom dwellings such as studios, dormitories. And activities that disturb less than 6 square feet of the interior or 20 square feet on the exterior. Now, this excludes window replacement, because window replacement is deemed an activity that will disturb painted surface. But again, let me emphasize, these are for buildings built before 1978 or older than 1978. Work done by individuals in housing, that means a homeowner working on their own home that they live in, is not under this rule. But I have to emphasize, the human body does not know if the house is rented, occupied by an owner. Lead-based paint poisoning is absolutely a real thing and can affect adults as well. So caution must be heeded when any renovations are done, even by a homeowner for their own project. And we can offer assistance with that as well. The EPA has pretty strict rules and fines for violation of RRP. It may suspend, revoke, or modify a firm's certification when they're found not to be in compliance. And we do compliance inspections. Non-compliance contractors can be fined up to $37,500 for each violation per day. Contractors who knowingly or willfully violate this regulation can face criminal charges. I encourage, one of the things that I encourage is if a contractor, some contractors feel, well, I've been working around this all my life. It hasn't hurt me. Why should I obey the rules and laws? Because the people that they're exposing to are the victims. And children, adults, can all be victimized by the ingestion. Now, you ask, well, how can an adult just walking around a dusty room, they can cause the dust to be airborne, and again, it can be inhaled. Also, workers and adults can take the dust that's on their fingers and hands, and they can, while they're eating, they can ingest it on a sandwich, whatever they're doing. They can cause the ingestion of unsafe levels, and there's no such thing as a safe level, but an unsafe level of, I'm losing the picture here. Okay. I wanted to go back a little bit because I missed that point, and I wanted to talk about some of the ill effects of lead, even in adults. One of the downsides is the inability to concentrate, again, irritability, difficult sleeping, and difficult in function. One of the things that lead does in the body, it slows the absorption rate of healthy red blood cells for oxygen. Oxygen is needed for all growth. It's needed to maintain a healthy body. And one of the things that we see is children that are lead poisoned, again, suffer from growth, development, brain development. Children can have seizures. And one of the things we want to do is teach that this is one of the most preventable poisonings there are today. Do we have any questions or anything from anybody? Well, we'll do the polls first.
Well, before we go to questions, let's go to polls. So I have a poll for you to see, before your questions, we hope that Chris's presentation on lead-based paint, renovation, repair, and painting rule has added to or refreshed your knowledge of the issue. Will you respond to the two polls? So here's the first one. While there are no negative health benefits from low levels, paint dust is the most common lead exposure. So we've had 8%, 10% have voted. Continue to vote, please. There seems to be some differences of opinion, Chris. We'll give it 5 more seconds.
Wait till some questions come up.
So we've got 76%, and it's slowing down. All right, so we'll close the poll, and the results here you see on the screen. 77% say false and true, Chris, so you may have something to say about that. Let's go ahead and get the second poll, and then if you have some comments to make, we'll launch the poll. In elementary and preschools built before 1978, the RRP regulations must be followed if, and so far people are saying all of the above. %82 have voted. We'll close the poll and show you the results.
98.
So, Chris, do you have something to say about those two polls, or?
Sure. Well, we'll go with this one that's before us here at 98%. We'll get going. Yes, indeed. Lead regulations and RRP must be followed. If you disturb more than 20 square feet on the exterior, 6 on the interior, or when the children are there are under 6 years old. Now, again, the window aspect of it, any window removed, even if it's a window that's 2 foot by 2 foot, all windows are a part of this regulation in pre-78 housing and child-occupied facilities. Well, and while there are no health effects on the first question, while there are no health effects from low levels, the most common lead exposure is from dust, and there are no safe levels of lead exposure. So if we can go, I don't know if we can pull that one up on our screen here. It's not responding to my controls. Or maybe we can't go back on that one. But yes, there's no safe levels, and dust on the floor inhalation is indeed the most common way. And that's what the RRP is about. I encourage anybody to send me an email. I can send them a link to any kind of supportive brochures and regulations, whatever they need to do.
All right, I'll hide those results. Thank you very much, Chris. We had a couple of people who, a couple of votes, percentage votes, who said just children under 6 years of age, but it's certainly more than that. So let's open it up now and see if you have any questions with regard to lead-based paint. And you remember, you have 2 ways to ask questions. You can just click on the hand symbol at the top. When you do that, I will open your microphone and you can talk directly to Chris. I do see one here. So I'm going to unmute you, John, so we can hear you if you want to ask a question.
Yeah, for both the lead-based paint and the asbestos. There's kind of a question: if a school has been built, let's say in the 80s, and they classify it pretty much asbestos-free. Okay, I know I do my 3-year adhere all the time, and I do my 6-month surveillance, and I train twice on the asbestos training with a professional in our school. Okay, and I've got all these things documented. So, you know, are we in a safe category with my question with our school built in the 80s, and this is, you know, past 1978?
Okay, great question. John, all schools are required to have an asbestos program. Even if they're built in 2006, one of the things that we need to teach is that asbestos is not, asbestos-containing building materials are not outlawed. They're no longer illegal. It was a time period in history when asbestos-containing building materials were banned. But I believe in, I'm not sure what year, 2001, there was a court case that allowed asbestos-containing materials to continue. As a result, even though a school was built in 1980 or 2006, asbestos can be reintroduced into a school. So part of the HERA that you talk about, plan, is to teach that. And once a school has been declared asbestos-free, and that has to be done through either the architect, if it's built before newer than 1988. If it's built newer than 1988, there's a way in which the architect can, write a letter saying that no asbestos, to his knowledge, no asbestos-containing materials were utilized in the building of the school. Before, older in 1978, that is not applicable. So a school built in the early 1980s, for example, they have to either get the components inspected, which is a costly process, and tested to prove that there is indeed no asbestos-containing materials. A trained asbestos inspector knows what building materials, the floor tile, the ceiling tile, they know what to look for. And anything that's suspicious, they can either test it to prove that it's not asbestos-containing material, or they can assume it is. And if, for example, if they even tested everything in the school that they suspected and it came out to be asbestos-free, that paperwork would be submitted to the EPA. We would look it over, determine if it indeed meets the criteria for asbestos-free. Then the EPA, in turn, will send the district a letter declaring that indeed what you've submitted is asbestos-free. But on the other hand, it still requires certain aspects of the regulation to be in effect at the school. One is that it eliminates is the need to have an asbestos inspection every 3 years if it's been officially deemed to be asbestos-free. But again, John, it still requires an asbestos management program to stop.
Yeah, we have a full asbestos management, and it's updated every 6 months.
Okay, good. John, you have my email address, and I'd be happy to review anything you have, and further chat with you about your school district, and assist you.
Yeah, see, I'm safety and security, and I do this stuff full time. In fact, our safety binder, we got 539 points out of 540 with all of our adheres and stuff like that.
Good for you, John, and I'd be happy to assist you in clarifying. These are sometimes confusing regulations, and that's what we're here for. And I'd appreciate an email from you. Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you, Chris. I've got another question for you here. Here's a question from one of the participants. Why does the EPA feel it is necessary to impose regulations on private, non-public funded homes?
Well, if this is addressing lead, or I'm not sure if it's addressing lead or asbestos. Is it lead that we're talking about?
That was unclear.
Okay, but I'll address the lead aspect of it. The federal law came up because of the numbers of children we have that suffer elevated lead levels. It doesn't matter if they come from a project in the inner city or from a rural home. Lead poisoning is lead poisoning. And this law started, I believe, in about 2006 or 7 is when it started phasing in. And we don't regulate the single-family home if you're doing work on your own home. That we do not. We regulate the contractor, the professional person that is getting compensation for the work. But as I said earlier, I would discourage just going cold into a renovation on your own home without giving us a call. We don't have to know who you are. What we want to do is educate. So we don't regulate the single-family home working on your own home. We would regulate a single-family home if it's being rented and the landlord is doing or hiring somebody to do the work. We regulate the contractor.
Thank you, Chris. Here's another question. In schools built after 1988, is there still a management plan requirement?
All righty, good question. Yes, there is. The management plan, certain aspects of the management plan, again, like every 3-year inspections, those are the things that, that's an example of what does not have to be done. Because of the potential reintroduction of asbestos into a school, that's why we teach, we have the program, the Asbestos Awareness. I just challenge anybody that has concern about that. You can go to a major hardware store today, and you can find drywall mud. And you can look at the drywall mud and look at the ingredients. Sometimes it says may contain a foreign mineral. That foreign mineral can be asbestos. Again, because the law only prohibited new uses of asbestos-containing material. So you can reintroduce it into a new school, a brand new school. So even though you have a letter from the architect and everything's been done pretty good, and that architect was careful to make sure on the building specs not to use asbestos-containing products, it can be reintroduced simply by a repair in a school.
All right, there's another question for you. Regarding the required 2-hour asbestos awareness training, is there a link to the free online training? If not, can you recommend a CD or a DVD?
Okay, I sure can. When you put my email back up there, they can just send me an email, and I will send you a DVD. That's for the designated person for the school district. We have a DVD for that, and I can send the PowerPoint, very similar to the one that we saw today, and I can send these by email. But the videos that are longer need to be done on a DVD, which I'd be happy to send via U.S. mail to anybody that's interested.
Thank you, Chris. Another question is the term asbestos-free a proper term?
Asbestos-free, in order to be considered asbestos-free on a building component, it has to be tested. It has to be tested in a laboratory, and then results have to be recorded and kept on the management record. So it can be a pretty solid term, asbestos-free. But when you're talking about an entire school being asbestos-free, it has to go through some technical hoops to be determined, indeed, that there is no asbestos there as best as we can determine.
Thank you, Chris. Another question regarding RRP. If a person is an EPA-accredited lead paint inspector or risk assessor, does that person still have to be RRP certified? If yes, why?
That's a good question, and I remember reading about that not too long ago. It's addressed in the regulations, and I don't know the answer to that. But I can get that answer. I don't want to speak because I'm not 100% sure, but I can email anybody that's inquiring about that the exact whether it is or is not, and I don't want to speak because I don't know.
All right, thank you. I don't see any other questions here. Let me close the session. As we promised early on, Chris and I will stay on short for a few minutes shortly after the webinar to make sure that we answer any questions that may be lingering. So we'll stay connected with the broadcast. You can raise your hand and have a verbal dialogue with Chris, or we certainly will keep the chat box or the question box open. So in closing, just to remind you, our Clean, Green, and Healthy Tribal Schools Initiative will be sponsoring a 2-day workshop in June or July this year. The workshop will include some of the programs featured in this series and additional topics. Participants there will have opportunities for discussion and collaboration with the presenters and their co-participants. Please let us know if you're interested in attending. Thank you very much for attending today's webinars on asbestos awareness and the RRP rule. Anyone who would like to stay connected for a few minutes to ask questions is most welcome to do so. And so, Chris, will you stay on for just a few minutes to see if we have any participants with additional questions? Thank you. So, Chris, I'm scanning, and I think you've got the list. I don't see any hands up. No questions coming in. Several thank yous. And people are beginning to sign off. There's still some people who are connected, Chris.
Okay, I'm still here.
Yeah, if you don't mind, let's stay on and see if there's any questions that folks might have. We still have 32 people who are connected. They're slowly signing off. I don't see any more questions. Good class, somebody says. Thank you, thank you. Lots of thank yous. Good class. Excellent. Here's a question came up here. So here's a question from someone. We have staff housing which were built before 1978. Do we have a legal obligation to inform the residents of the possibility of lead?
Well, good question. I believe the answer to that is yes. If it's considered rental housing in exchange for anything, you know, part of the school teacher's contract, or actually they have to collect rent for that, then teacher housing built before 1978 is subject to the renovation, repair, and paint if the contractor, and we say contractor, if it's a tribal housing situation where housing is offered to teachers and it's tribal housing, then the tribal housing that does the repairs inside that may disturb 6 square feet on the inside, 20 on the outside, or any window, then the tribe would probably likely be the firm, or maybe the construction aspect of the tribe, if it is, and then at least one worker that's doing the work that, again, would disturb 6 square feet on the inside, 20 on the outside, or any window. That person would probably have to be, I'm sure, would have to be as a certified renovator on the RRP program.
Again, thank you, Chris. I don't see any more questions. There's several people who have asked for brochures, and I'll make sure that Chris gets that information following the workshop so that he can follow up. And we're going to close the webinar now. Thank you very much for your attendance. Chris, we're down to 16, but I think that people are beginning to sign off pretty quickly here. And so we do hope that you will consider attending some of our other webinars every Wednesday at the same time. Wait, here's one question here. Let me see. Lisa, are you still on? Lisa? She has her hand up, but her hand just went up. So it may be that she just hit a different button. So Lisa, I've unmuted you if you'd like to ask Chris a question. So it must have been accidental. All right, Chris, I think we'll sign off for now. Thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, presenter, for this excellent pair of presentations. And
Thank you.
Have a good afternoon.
Bye-bye.